Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the And Also podcast. I'm your host, Madison, and today's episode, once again, is going to be a little bit dark. I feel like I should just stop making that disclaimer, and you should just assume that this podcast is going to talk about pretty rather dark things. But before we get into today's episode, I first of all wanted to thank you guys for all the love, support, and donations on our last episode about schizophrenia and suicide. It was such an important episode to me. So the fact that you guys were there to support me and just be amazing through that episode was so special. So thank you so much. To get started with today's episode, of course, let's get into our drink of the day. So today is one of my favorite non-coffee drinks. This is a vanilla iced matcha with oat milk, and it's from the Walt and Whitman Cafe here in Saratoga Springs. So if you are in this area, of course, I'd recommend checking it out. Honestly, this has become one of my favorite matchas, and I'm super, super picky. Usually, I just make my matcha at home because I am so picky about it, but this has been my favorite. So my guest and I will be drinking our oat milk vanilla matcha lattes. And next up for book of the week, this one is super special to me. I bought this book for multiple people who have dealt with grief, death, dying, loss, all those fundamental parts of being a human. This is called Dying, a Memoir. It's by Cory Taylor, and I read this probably a year ago, so give me a second to refresh myself. It's literally just that. It's a memoir about Cory's last few years, or just her end of life, essentially. And first of all, the cover is just so beautiful. I love the way this book looks and feels. At the age of 60, Cory gets diagnosed with melanoma-related brain cancer. Her illness is not treatable, it's terminal, and so she's facing death very head-on and in a very real way. And so she talks about her experience with continuing to live while dying, and I think it's absolutely incredible. It gave me a whole new perspective on really what it means to die. And if you guys have not been able to tell already by my previous episodes, I'm literally obsessed with death. It's a whole thing, and I'm going to do a solo episode, I think, about death, and I do have an episode coming up in the future about existentialism. But man, like, I am so fascinated by death and dying. And I know that sounds concerning. I promise it's not. I'm in therapy. I'm literally fine. But just the idea of existentialism, dying, what's next? Is there a next? Is this it? Is life meaningful? All of that stuff is super fascinating to me. And so, yeah, any book that I read about dying, I'm probably going to share it with you. So with all of that being said, let's just jump into today's episode. I'm super excited to dive into more grief-related topics. I guess excited is a strange word, but I'm really looking forward to these conversations because in day-to-day life, it's not that often that you get to dive into your grief with just anybody. So I guess being able to do that has been something that I really value, and I'm super excited, and I'm really looking forward to sharing today's episode with you. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you subscribe, like this video, share it with a friend, and of course, if you are streaming on any platform such as Spotify or Apple Podcasts, make sure to rate the show, give it 5 stars if you enjoyed it. It really helps me out, and of course, add it to your playlist. Thank you guys so much for watching, and let's get into today's episode. Welcome to today's episode. I have a very special guest today, and this is a conversation I've been looking forward to basically since the first time I met you. As soon as we discovered we had this thing in common, it was like, okay, we have to do this. Yeah. So I would love for you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, so we met at your boss's, my former professor's, I guess, holiday party. You were the only other person there who was like remotely my age. A couple other people, younger people who were there, were still in school. And I'm at a point right now where I do not want to talk to Skidmore students. I have a couple of close friends who are still at school, and everybody else, I don't even want to be perceived. So my office is on campus, and that's a lot for me. We were talking at Christine's party, and then, of course, just how it happens, our shared points of having lost pretty significant people in our lives came up. My way of dealing with it often is humor, and I don't remember exactly what I said, but I remember saying it and sort of chuckling it off. And then
Yeah.
you saying, no, wait a second.
It's like, hold on, wait. That sounds a little too familiar to me.
Yeah, exactly. So when I was a freshman at Skidmore, just before COVID really popped off, my father went in for surgery to get his kidney replaced and never left the hospital, I guess, is the best way to at least get it sort of introductory level. He went in for surgery and surgery went well, and then he just didn't bounce back. And then the whole rest of the actual world fell apart with COVID. At least for me, I've watched a couple episodes and we talked at the party, but I would love an introduction sort of from where you're coming at.
Okay, so basically, November of 2022, it was my fall semester of my senior year. Was that my senior? It's like so hard. We had this conversation too at the party. I literally have this like blank spot in my mind of where I was at in life, but it was the fall of my senior year of college at FIT, and my ex-partner Regis, who I was with for 6+ years, committed suicide. He had a very, I don't even know what the right word, just like horrific battle with schizophrenia. It was a very difficult thing to navigate because it's not something, like people don't talk about suicide in general and just like suicidal ideation. But especially when it comes to psychotic disorders, it's usually you hear like the depressed person who commits suicide or the really happy person who commits suicide. But you never hear much about the person who has an ongoing battle with a mental illness that completely takes over their idea of reality. Like you couldn't even have a conversation with him. Like if he were to speak to you in person, he would meet up with you at a remote location in the middle of the woods. He would throw your phone into the woods. He would write down what he needed to say on a piece of paper, show it to you, rip it up, and then light it on fire. Yeah, it was really intense. And also with schizophrenia, the person dealing with it often doesn't know that they're sick. They usually think that their reality is reality and everybody else is working against them with whatever force is like after them, wherever that paranoia is stemming from. So it was really hard for us to get him any help. And it was hard to have a normal conversation with him. We did know that at some point it was going to come to an end. We just didn't know how bad that end would look. So yeah, that's a brief summary of it.
The brief grief, yeah.
The brief grief. Ooh, that's a good podcast.
Or the grief
name.
brief.
The grief brief. You said it was December?
It was
November 11th.
The end of November. So my dad's birthday is November 11th.
Right.
Yeah, we had some weird, interesting dates lining up.
Yes, because my birthday is the 30th.
And my dad died sort of midnight 30th / morning of 1st. No, it was a very, specifically that time in my life, I remember being up here sort of on campus and, staying on the phone and knowing that my dad was going in for surgery and he was old. He was in his late 70s. So I knew for a while I dealt with a lot of family members or, close family friends dying. And so I had to do some of that fast growing up already. And I'd come to sort of the realization that, my dad was old and he wasn't in the best shape. I sort of, again, as time passes, my memories of him fade and adjust. Think of Danny DeVito is sort of how he's built. I'm a double IVF baby, which I'm not going into, but so I'm donor egg, donor sperm. So I don't look like either of my parents. And so he was like a 5'4", pretty unhealthy looking Jewish man. And so I'm not that. And so I hadn't really thought of that, him going into surgery and not in the best shape, probably shouldn't have been approved for it. That's, again, another discussion for a different day.
Right.
But getting calls from my family, he's doing well, he's going to surgery, blah, blah, hey, good luck, that kind of stuff. And then coming out of surgery and getting a call from one of my older sisters who is blood related to him and saying, hey, he's not doing super hot. that sort of thing. My mom calling me, and they'd been divorced since I was 4, so they were never very close necessarily. But her calling me, and she's always been very upfront and open with me about these things and saying, hey, this is the state that your dad's in. What do you want to do? I think you should come and see him. And so beginning that process of emailing teachers and telling my friends, I mean, like, hey guys, like I'm going home for another weekend, and sort of trying to figure out how to deal with that in the moment is something that was crazy for me to try and figure out how to even begin of sort of, what's coming.
Yeah, but it's almost a fight or flight response.
Yeah.
Did you know, like, truly that it was going where it was going, or did you kind of feel that it couldn't be possible that it was going to end there?
I knew that he was going to die while I was still young. I didn't know how old I was going to be, but by the time I was 20, he was getting up there.
You were almost like anticipating it at some
Yeah,
point.
and so I knew that, and everybody knows that their parents are going to die.
Right.
It's a thing that happens. You just sort of hope not as soon as possible, really, or as late as possible, I guess, is the better way to phrase that. He went in for surgery, and there were those questions of, God, like...
It's like almost, when anyone goes into surgery, there's that assumed risk, but you never think like that's going to happen to you or your loved one. You're like, okay, I know that it's risky. It's surgery, but like the doctors know what they're doing. It's going to be fine. You're in a hospital. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And so there was a bit of that. Okay, he's in good hands. He's been wanting this for a while. He'd been doing dialysis for a couple years, and that's not long. You do dialysis for a couple of years and you either get a transplant or sort of that's the end of the line. And so this was sort of this new step for him. And like you said, it sort of becomes a blur. I got that first call, and then from that point on, it was having these tough conversations with my sisters, who are both much older than me. They were from one of his previous marriages, and being in the room for some of those really tough adult conversations of, hey, like, there's 3 kids here. You each get something to say, and having me participate in those. And I'm like, please don't make me make some of these calls. Like, I don't want to have to.
And that's tough that falls onto you, but you feel like you almost have to step up and be strong and, do the thing. But you're also dealing with this like existential turmoil at the same time that you can't even begin to process because there is just so much happening. Like when I think of when I first got the call, actually, I unfortunately found out through Snapchat stories. Nobody called me. Nobody reached out. I had to almost put the pieces together. There was no obituary. There was nothing. I found out through Snapchat. I had to reach out to his family to get confirmation, which I didn't get for another few days. During those few days where I was like, I think he's dead, but I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah.
But like, I know he is.
Yeah.
But there's still that hope that like, maybe they just posted like, rest in peace, Regis, 1998 to 2022, like for the fun of it. Like my brain was really trying to reach for, this can't be real, this is okay. But during those few days, I was, calling my professors, calling my therapist, setting up appointments, calling my family, planning my trip home. And as soon as I got all those plans into place, as soon as I made that last email to the last professor I needed to talk to, I completely crashed.
Yeah.
And completely like blacked out.
No, I had that sort of moment of, I remember sort of the last real call that I got. I'd gone down to visit him for a weekend. Thank God for Amtrak. And terrible, really hard weekend, but it was like right at the end of the semester. I was like, I'm gonna, it was, he would want me to finish strong, whether he's going to make it out of this or not. I don't want to start my college experience, whatever the
freshman year,
whatever the next 4 years are going to bring. And I remember getting that one last call, fortunately with the professor that I love to this day, and super incredibly understanding with all of it. I stepped out of the class and took this call, and I went back and I was like, hey, I'm going home. I got to go do this.
Was it the call that like he had passed? Or
no, it was
that
the call of like he's going into essentially hospice type of care. This or that happened. my friends and I, for the longest time, it's dwindled now that, again, like 4 years later, God, we're all graduated and everything.
It's
sort of,
weird.
the friend group has shrunk a little bit, but at that point, we still had like 20 or 30 kids from my grade who were still close enough where we had all planned this Friendsgiving type of thing
Right.
for that weekend of the 30th and 31st. And I
Damn,
had
30th.
and I had planned, I was like, hey guys, like I'll host the pregame for this, and then we'll go to our friend's house with a little
So
bigger of a
you
house.
had a whole thing happening.
I was at the hospital with my dad, and the room cleared out for me, and it was sort of my time, and I just sat with him for a couple of minutes and really said that last goodbye. And it's still a decision that I don't think I'll ever know if it was the right move or not, but sort of with my mom, I went home and I hosted this Friendsgiving with my friends, and I went to this party that we had been planning for months, essentially since we graduated high school. And then right around at midnight when he did actually pass, I knew, I was like, I am gonna go home now. I got to be with my friends, and a few of them knew what was happening. My really close friends knew the extent to really what was going on. And so I was like, hey guys, like I'm going home. I love you all. I'll be okay. I'll stay in touch. And I got home and my mom was still up, and she told me that sort of essentially like literally on my walk home that had happened. And so that's not being there for him actually passing is something that I will forever grapple with. But at the same time, I'm not going to blame myself for that. Like I can't, and I'm not, I've learned to not do that after a couple years.
Yeah.
Certainly.
I mean, at first it's like you
Yeah.
almost think for some reason if you would have stayed, then this
Yeah.
would have happened. And it's at the end of the day, I think you already knew what was coming and you did what in the moment felt the most manageable.
Yeah. And so I'm not very Jewish at all. But I was raised very sort of kooky Jewish of all the spiritual parts of it. And so I'm not sure how familiar you are with sort of Jewish traditions. We do this thing called Shiva, which at least I was raised to understand it's this period of time where your friends come and you celebrate the life of whoever has passed. And I think my mom knew that under no uncertain circumstances did I want to do an actual adult Shiva for my dead father during essentially our first winter break back. With her wisdom that I probably question more than I ought to, she sort of helped me make that call of where, this is the time where you get to be with your friends, and the ones who know are going to be there for you, and the ones who don't, they don't, but they're still there for you,
Right. Right.
And so it was one of those moments of knowing, but not knowing, and then
Yeah.
And
I
then,
get that.
days later doing actual Shiva with my adult sisters and all of his adult friends, and hearing the 1,001 ways people can tell you that they're so sorry and all of that stuff.
It's the aftermath, the condolences, he would be so happy. He's in a better place.
Yeah.
He just wants you to XYZ. It's like you understand the intent, but it almost leaves you feeling emptier. It's like, how dare you say these things to me? Like he should be here. That still doesn't comfort me in a way that justifies what he had to go through. Saying things like that downplays the suffering that these people had to go through before they died.
I remember the first person whose response, or the first time he had seen me, sort of just one of the adults at the temple that I had gone to growing up, did my bar mitzvah at, and then had worked as a TA at. Lawrence knew me. His wife had passed away when he had sort of young children growing up, who, again, my peers at this temple. And I don't think it was a conscious effort on his part, but he said, and again, I can't remember the words that he said, but I remember my response of, thank you for not saying you're sorry. And that was off-putting to him, obviously, because that's a weird thing to be told. But I was like, thank you for not pitying me. And I know that I wasn't getting pity from, and it was pity, but not in the way that, you don't want. But it was a moment of, this is a person who understands this weight and this trauma and this pain, maybe not consciously, but at least it was a separation from that monotony that you can get into of I'm so sorry for your loss. I can't imagine what it's like.
I'm glad you can't imagine it.
Yeah, no, exactly.
It's such
And
a
there are
strange
people
thing.
who can imagine it, and those
Right.
are always the people who have the right thing to say.
Yeah.
And certainly being at Skidmore and knowing a couple of people who are part of our aptly named half orphan club of just people who've lost parents
Yeah.
sort of over the past couple of years. There's that bond of you know what to say, and then sort of what doesn't even need what can be unsaid.
It's something that I learned to tell my friends, because a lot of my friends didn't understand what I was going through. Granted, most people probably don't to the full extent understand what it's like to lose someone to schizophrenia. It's like a very niche club that I'm in. The main thing that I told people was like, sometimes you don't have to say anything. Sometimes it's better to just listen. And sometimes the silence is the best possible thing you could say or present. But it's always those initial moments when somebody says like, hey, I've lost this person. Even now, as someone who's lost a lot of people, I'm like, I have this moment of like, what do I say that's the right thing? What would I want to hear? And I have to make this like very quick decision of like, do I just cop out and give them the, I'm so sorry that you had to go through that? Or do I actually reveal myself essentially and say like, hey, I get it. You know so much now that you've been through it that you want to like, you hold yourself to the standard of saying the right thing. There's still nothing you can really say.
There's never a right thing to say, whether you're coming from a position having experienced this kind of loss, especially as a young person. No, but the amount of, I guess, fun again that I can just have with, again, the people that I know from school who, again, are part of that club of having lost a parent. Of there's a baseline, you really have something in common, and you just know how to talk about certain things with that person most of the time. Certainly opening up that conversation with you with what was a joke about this terrible, the worst thing that has happened in my life thus far. There are just ways that you learn how to deal with it, and that just becomes how you approach, I think, a lot of different things in life, and people just sort of have to deal with it.
Yeah, it definitely gives you a different sense of empathy too, that I think it's not that a lot of people are lacking, but it's that a lot of people just don't know yet because they haven't been through it.
I do this weird thing with, like, I'll meet somebody and they have this aura or energy about them, and I'm like, wow, you are incredibly chill, and you just sort of get things, and you're nonchalant and laid back, and you're very comfortable in your own skin. What the hell happened to you?
Right. Like,
what,
you know somebody
what have you
that's
done?
dead?
Exactly. Like, what have you had to deal with growing up? And that's not to say that I think people perceive me that way, but I'll see people and be like, okay, no, yeah, you had something go on, and I want to talk to you about that. I need to get into that.
Right, because you could do the mundane, like, oh, so what do you do for a living? Blah, blah, blah. But it's like, can we just get into it, please?
Yeah.
I can't. You obviously got this news basically probably start of finals season.
Yeah.
A really intense time. Did you find a hard time communicating it to your professors, and like, how did that process go for you?
For the most part, it was pretty easy. And again, we're entering a moment in time where it's really hazy. Sort of my one real like seminar teacher, they do sort of a first year experience where this is your point person professor. For the first 2 years at Skidmore. It's sort of an introduction really to what a professor should be. And Fitzer was incredible about it. Take as much time as you want, very supportive. For the most part, all of my professors were great about it. I got the single lowest grade that I've ever gotten at Skidmore from one professor who was like, hey, yeah, you just didn't really turn in a bunch of stuff. I'm like,
do you forget the email I sent you at the beginning of the
Dude, I came to your office hours, man. Like, come on.
It's so frustrating. But you almost
I
can't
got it
care.
in late, but like, no, and that was the thing. I was like, I can't I cannot care about this. And Fitzer, again, he was like, hey, like, I see this grade. It's way out of the norm for everything else. Like, are you okay? Do you want to appeal it? Do you want to do anything? I'm like, no, I want to go home. I want to go home. And going back, I want to crash. And then I crashed.
After your dad passed, you continued the semester. Like,
I finished strong.
so
Yeah.
you
as
didn't, did
strong
you
as I
take a
could.
week off? Did you take,
Again, yeah, timelines are fuzzy. I was home for the weekend and took certainly a couple of days off, but I was in the headspace of I don't want to leave this semester lingering. Like I made it this
Right.
far and I want to at least set myself like I didn't want that to snowball, I guess, for whatever
yeah,
toxic relationship that of with work and sort of productivity that I
yes.
have and have maintained and certainly adopted from my parents, ways that they work and are dedicated to what they're doing. But I really didn't take a whole lot of time off. So
You probably knew that once you took that time, the reality would hit
yeah.
and then you were just going to be done for
Yes.
like a period.
Yeah.
So I totally get that. I took a month off and it was really hard. Basically, I went back for finals week. That was tough because some of my professors gave me like alternative tests or like were super lenient with the grading or, made it so I didn't have to write certain papers. I was in a lot of group projects at the time, so there was that like guilt of like, oh my God, I'm letting down these people. Thankfully, they were understanding, and I was in a really small major, so everyone in my major knew what was going on. I think I had like 35, 40 kids in my major. And then there were some professors who were like, you're going to take the final and whatever happens, happens. By some miracle, I got a 4.0
Wow.
that
Yeah,
semester. Never did it again. Never could do it again.
Yeah, it's that sort of shut everything else. Like I have time to deal with nothing else. Just
Yup.
get it done. Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
I had, winter break. I got to just recuperate. And then going back to my spring semester of senior year, I took 21 credits and an independent study, worked full time, and had an internship. And everyone's like, are you crazy? And I'm like,
Yeah.
yes, I have to be. Because if I'm going to finish this degree, free time cannot exist because I cannot be alone with my thoughts right now. The day after graduation, my life as I knew it, like completely fell apart. I had to basically like relearn who I am with this new grief and this experience. And it was just like, autopilot for so long and not knowing where that was going to take me and thinking I could just keep going. I was living in New York City, so I was partying, I was going out, I was, up until 5 a.m. I was just doing all these things, going to concerts and having random, drunken breakdowns in the bathroom with my friends, but, brushing it off as if I'm fine. School was a great distraction. A distraction, like, can only go on for so long until it, like, completely falls apart and crumbles.
There are times where I question how much I've really sat down and dealt with it. And then again, it's like, it's been like 4 years since my dad passed away. And I've, shout out my therapist,
literally
been going through it for 4 years and to discredit a lot of the work that I've done. Again, now having graduated and I'm an adult and adulting kind of sucks sometimes. Just that grind and it's
capitalism
that
adulting
exactly,
is like a curse.
and continuing that, that struggle with how much that grief is a constant. There are days where, it's slow and I just think, God, I wish I could give my dad a call. And I can't. And that's just something you got to live with.
Yeah, still to this day, I text Regis basically when anything ever happens. I will have like a simple thought and I will just like text it to him. I don't know what it's doing for my brain, but I think it's just, holding on to whatever we kind of have.
I was raised with that notion of when somebody dies, they're not ever really gone. You carry a part of them and their memory within you. But something that I learned to do with my dad is, on Mother's Day or Father's Day or either of his parents' birthdays, and when I was with him, we would go and visit their graves. And so I actually recently over this past summer before I started, my first real adult job, took my dog and we drove out and we just hung out with my dad for an afternoon, really, and just sort of updated him on whatever, on graduation, on getting this job that, I told him that I was interning. Like, the last he heard, I was interning at this place
Right.
pretty much. And so doing those updates as like a life checkpoint, I guess, is at least one of the big ways that I stay in touch with him. And certainly another way that throughout that entire process of terrible, awful grief was getting closer with my two older sisters, who I had never had a very deep or meaningful conversation with them. All of a sudden I was a 19-year-old on the same level of decision-making and participation in the death of our father, as these two late 40s.
Yeah, and I think it's almost hard to say when something good comes from such a horrible situation, but at the same time, unfortunately, like, we do have to kind of find those things because there's really no other reason to continue.
Yeah.
And for me, it was kind of like, okay, either I literally kill myself too, or I need to find a reason to like continue living in this misery. And that only reason was becoming a better version of me and doing things that, maybe could support other people going through something similar. But it's hard to say that unfortunately I'm a better person from it.
I think that every time we wake up and it's a new day, we are different people than we were the day before. And it's a matter of approaching, again, the future with that sense of I'm going to be different and I'm going to be better.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be different. It's up to me to make sure that difference is into the positive. And that's way easier said than done when you're dealing with something like the catastrophic death of somebody that you love. But it's a matter really of that challenge that I think people who deal with some of the stuff that we've had to go through, it's why you've got that sense of similarity, because, you can look somebody in the eyes and sort of tell that, there's that sense of, oh, like I know what they've gone through, and that they're still here and that they're still with it and that they're still chugging along because it's what you have to do at some point. And there's always that sense of kinship, I think, that I totally get what you mean of like there are days where it's like, oh, I could just give up. Like I don't want to get out of bed. I want to just sort of bed rot for a week and a half and think about all the good times that, that I'm missing out with my dad. Or you can get up and you can not be that person, for better or worse, and sort of either push it back or sort of just soak in that grief while you're doing your daily work.
Yeah, and it's really hard to like blend the two. It's like, okay, I have this massive thing that's like following me around, but I have to, go to class, go to work, be a support system. What major changes have you seen in yourself since this experience?
I think certainly one of the big things and lessons that I've really tried to take to heart is to approach life with the sense of humor and sort of undying love for the people that are important to you. Every single time that we talked to each other, he would make sure to tell me that he loved me for the express reason. And we talked about this because you never know when that last time is going to be. Taking that with me and having that constant appreciation for the people who you do love and who are important to you is certainly something that I try to carry on.
I would love to know like how your relationships with your friends have changed, and if they have any sort of expectations for the old version of you to ever return.
For the most part, really, really fluid and understanding. That's an interesting way to put it, though, because I don't think I'd thought about it like that. But my friends knew me from this point of I got to school and I was kind of homesick and like not in the best mood to like really be going out. And then my dad died. So, I was always not fun hating, but it was always like, oh, dude, we're going to go downtown. I was like, no,
like I'm miserable.
Hang out out here and like smoke or drink and like in the apartment. Like, oh,
yeah.
Like every once in a while, I could be rallied to go downtown. But as for my friends from home who knew me certainly before that, it's an interesting point of I wonder if they see the different person that I am now as a different person because of specifically, the death of my father and going through that versus just a matter of the larger changes in life. Do you have any friends that are sort of in the similar position of... Yeah.
So I kind of have in my head what's considered like the before friends and the after friends. And in the process of Regis's death, I had to cut a lot of people out of my life because they were holding me to this expectation of like, why does Madison never come to parties anymore? Why doesn't Madison do this? Why does she not text me back? This was a 4-year build up to a suicide. I'm not just going to like brush it off and, be okay and be able to like indulge in the same way that I did before. There's my friends who knew me before through Regis and I being together. And so there were people from that period of my life who I kind of grew up with. And those are the people who I really have reconnected with since and who understood everything of the timeline. And then there were like my college friends who like, they knew me before, but they knew me as, this version of me without Regis in that way. And then there's people who I met after the whole thing. And you almost kind of decide, when do I like come forward with my situation? Is it going to alter my relationship? Are they going to think I'm weird? Are they going to look at me as like too traumatized to, invest energy into? But at the same time, those people also don't hold me to my past self. So it's a little bit tough. It's like I have friends from all these different chapters that all kind of see me in a different way. The people who never knew him and, met me after, it's almost like worse. It's almost like you can't really address it because they don't understand the full picture and they weren't there and they don't know him that way. So they feel like uncomfortable and nervous by me bringing it up and entering that world, even if it's just casual. Like sometimes I just want to say like, oh, Regis did this thing one time, and it's like, is she going to be okay? Like, is she going to make it?
I've gotten to a point, at least certainly with my home friends, especially who knew my dad, where I can say, oh, like, haha, like, blah, my dad, this or that.
Right.
And at that point, it's fine. There are moments where I revel in getting to make people uncomfortable, where it's like, I'm at a point in this process where whatever it is, like we had watched The Bear over this past summer, this big watch party. 3 of us had all lost parents at some point. And then there's a significant portion of this TV series where they deal with a dead relative. And so this show would come on and whatever, and they'd be like, oh, dead brother. And the 3 of us sitting in the corner next to each other, right. Of course, because it's hard to watch that kind of stuff, but you have the core people that who have gone through it, so you can squeeze a hand or, put your head on their shoulder. So for the harder moments, we do that. And then when we decided, okay, now we're going to make everybody else uncomfortable, we'd go like, oh my God, that's me.
Like literally me, I relate.
And everybody else in the room was just like, oh my God.
Yeah, it's like, you're not uncomfortable, so why are they uncomfortable?
No, exactly, right?
I totally get
You've
that.
got to, and that's again, like a way that I carry my dad's legacy, I guess I'll put it, is having fun. Like if you're not having fun and enjoying yourself, certainly there are moments where you got to just grind and not enjoy everything. But when you can have fun and joke around, do it.
Yeah, there's been moments where I've said like stuff that almost shocks me. I'm like, did I really just go there with that? But it's weird because other people get like uncomfy with it, and I'm like, no, I promise it was just a joke. Like I'm fine. Like you almost have to justify your funniness.
And I think there's some of that point of, I don't know if it is a responsibility, but you're just like, it happens and it happened. So,
right.
If I'm not helping you get used to it, nobody will, I guess, which is weird. There are times where it's a minefield for reasons where it shouldn't be. Yeah. And it doesn't I'm like, why are you freaking out about something that happened like to me, that kind of thing.
Were there any specific coping strategies or things you implemented for yourself in those early days that you feel like impacted your experience going forward?
I think a lot of it came down to really reflecting on the relationship that I had with him, and as quickly as possible coming to an understanding that our relationship ended on terms that were as good as they could have been. He had been my biggest supporter throughout my life with really whatever I was doing. And it got to a point where it was tough because, doing the divorced parent thing, I was going to his house every other weekend or something like that.
Right.
And then I turned, 17 or 18, and I was like, hey, I would love to see you when you live 2 hours away, but there's this party happening or there's that party happening. And I can count, the number of weekends where I wanted to be home and go drinking with my friends instead of spending time with him. You know, you can, with hindsight, say, well, shit, you know, I should have spent that time to really be with him or appreciated him or returned his call here. And, you know, and I will go back and scroll through my texts with him, and he'll have this joke of like, oh, haha, did they put you in witness protection? Because I hadn't responded to him in a while, as kids do, as you know.
Right. It's so hard. It's like it's not that you don't care about your parents. It's just life is happening.
Yeah.
And there's so much newness around you that it's so hard to say no to things.
Exactly. You know? And so I think a lot of this sort of in the days and months and years after of really reassuring myself that we shared a deep love and that there wasn't anything else that I could have done to have made things better for him going in there. You know, I was as good of a son as I could have been, which isn't perfect, that there's nothing else I could have done to have done better really by him, I guess.
That's a really great thing to have. Did you have any like guilt or regret in the early days?
My father had a really not great relationship with his two daughters, with my two sisters. He hadn't been the best, most present father for them. It was sure the excuse of it was a different time. So they were from his first marriage. He married again and had two stepsons. One of them was sort of a problem child and he didn't go along with, and the other was this angel that I've been told. I never got to meet Danny. And Danny died when he was 13 in a car accident. And so my father carried on this sort of grief of he had this son that he really wanted and enjoyed, and then it was taken from him. And then I came around, and it seemed like he sort of wasn't willing to let that same mistake happen again. And so there was that sort of that weird expectation on me always of like hearing sort of about Danny, and then oh, so that's why my dad is sort of always super involved. But in sort of, again, that sort of wake process after he had passed, having our family members come up to me and be like, you do understand how much he loved you, right? And sort of bordering that line of being told I'm sorry for you too many times of like, yes, no, I do. Yeah, I know. Yeah, thank you. And certainly that's not something that I would take for granted, but having that support system of family and friends who knew him and knew how much he cared for me definitely helped assuage some of that grief that I felt. Certainly, like I had said before, for not being there physically for when he had died. That was certainly something that I continue to feel guilty about, and is a conversation that I do eventually want to have with my sisters, because we've had those tough conversations of, they'd say, Aaron, you know, you are a kid. Like, it's not something that you needed to really be in the room for constantly. But I still can't quite get over the fact that I was out sort of with my friends when when that moment happened.
Right. It's so interesting because everybody that I've talked to about their grief, they have this one like little piece that just absolutely destroys them, or like they just can't get it out of their head. They kind of spiral about it. You think, you know, in the moment you're just doing a normal thing, and you don't understand the full picture until, you know, years later when you're looking back at it, or even, you know, weeks later, whatever it is. But there's always kind of a piece that lingers. I don't know if it's our way of letting ourselves take some responsibility so that it doesn't feel so heavy on, you know, the person that died or the situation. I don't know if it's us trying to take control over it, like saying, oh, well, if I would have done this or if I was there, you know, I don't know what that is, but everybody kind of has that moment with their grief.
There's always that sense of regret. I don't think you can ever move past those ideations of, I wish they were here to do this with me or to do that with me, or so I could tell them this or that. You know, there's always that hole that you never fill. You just sort of grow
around it.
Really, yeah, exactly. So it's a really interesting. Do you have something like that with Regis?
There's a lot of those, but it's tough because with Regis there was many stages of him at the end. There was, you know, him when he first started getting sick, and like I knew that something was off. I knew that we were headed down a dark road. Then there was the point where like it was very clear something was going on. But at first, you know, I didn't really have the language to understand what he was going through. It's like all these different phases. There's always something a place where I wish I stepped in, so it didn't get to that next phase. But I think the big thing for me, I constantly wonder why he didn't call me. and why he didn't ever signal to me like, hey, I need somebody. Because I think truly it's that he knew that I would be there for him. And I just think he didn't want it anymore. He just wanted to die. And, what do you do with that? So for me, that's kind of the moment of like, could I have done something? What if I called him? Because I remember the few weeks leading up to it, I knew he was not good. And I thought about calling him a lot. And I never did. And I was like, I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it tomorrow. And then, tomorrow never came. So I think for me, that was one of the big moments of like, what if I said something? I am no match for schizophrenia.
Yeah.
There's nothing I could have done.
Yeah. It's an impossible world of what ifs. And I think I'm fortunate that I think that I learned to sort of avoid that as early as possible. Again, certainly shout out to my therapist.
Yeah, literally.
For that. Yeah, I think there are too many things, especially with grief, that you can just get lost in. When my friends come to me and they're like, hey, like I'm dealing with this thing, like, can we talk about it? Or like, this is happening with my parents, or my dad's sick or my mom's sick. One of my go-to things is like, hey, like, do you want advice? Do you want me to come to you with something?
Yes.
Or
do you
want to distract you? Yeah. Do you want to listen?
Yeah.
You need somebody to just hear what you're saying and say, hey, I appreciate you telling me. I'm here for you.
Do you want to go out and,
yes,
get
exactly.
drunk?
Because there are times where like that's the only thing that I needed. And my friends were there for me for that. But it's an impossible, constant cat and mouse game of like, oh, I could have done this, I could have done that. And getting to a point within that grieving process of saying, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to continue living my life and being confident in the fact that I did everything that I could.
The good old life milestones.
Yeah.
It's very weird because I think we obviously both graduated college at a time where we were dealing with grief and the loss of somebody very important, but then there's also the entire future, not only our future, but their future, and opportunities and experiences that they would have had as well that you're grieving. So you're almost kind of grieving on behalf of two people, if not even more, your whole family, your whole collection of people. So what was that like for you with especially graduating college, but anything that kind of came after that?
Certainly at graduation, my family is very tiny. And my aunt passed away my sophomore year. And then my grandfather, who was sticking it out, he was so old. He got to like days within turning either 98 or 99. I don't remember. God. But at that point, the numbers sort of just blur. And so then at graduation, the people that I had there were my mom, my sister Elizabeth, her two kids, and then our two very close friends from out in Wisconsin, which is where my mom is from, Steve and Sam. It's palpable, the people that are missing.
It's like you could have everyone there, but the first thing you're going to notice is that your dad isn't there.
And it was so tough because that was something that, he had gotten to come up to Skidmore and see my dorm once, and then he passed. And so he like just barely got to know the person that I would become after 4 years at school. And so it's really hard to get to that end point. It's a milestone past a milestone. It's not just I started school and, and I'm making it through. It's I'm done now.
Yeah.
And I got this job now and I'm out and I'm working.
You're a different person entirely.
Entirely.
Every year that passes in college, I mean, like who is that?
Yeah, right? And like even while I was still in school and doing really well, or like, I would get a great grade on a paper or a test or whatever, and I couldn't just call him while everybody else is celebrating. And as we all have cause to do for something like graduation, and then to just sort of need to find time to have your own sort of quiet reflection about it all has definitely been difficult. And it's been a weird, at least mental draw of like, yeah, no, I am different from a lot of these people in not the best way, in sort of a way that like really kind of sucks. Yeah.
Yeah. It's tough celebrating when there's this other piece. And that's, I named my podcast "And Also" because it's like, I am a grieving mess and there's this whole world of me. And also it's okay that I, can indulge in fun, and it's okay. And that's something I'm trying to learn is like, both things can exist. Like there can be the grief, the insufferable pain, the misery, the existentialism. And also there can be this part of me that's allowing myself to enjoy those moments. But like we keep saying, it's so much easier said than done.
Yeah, or even like birthdays. Like birthdays
Oh, yeah.
suck.
And
It's
the
like,
new year.
interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And like Hanukkah for me,
Yeah.
of course I would call him and just talk about whatever. It was just another excuse to hear his voice on the phone and, and tell him that I love him. It often feels really hard to really thoroughly enjoy a celebration of really anything, which I think is one of those sort of underappreciated just facts about dealing with death.
It's always there. Some holidays it's not the entire focus, but some holidays it's all you can think about. My best friend threw me a surprise birthday party, which, to be honest with you, I have zero recollection of. Apparently, someone went to say like a speech about me, and I just started like uncontrollably laughing at them while they were saying all these wonderful things about me. They were like, you're so amazing, you're so strong, we all look up to you, and I'm just like dying laughing uncontrollably. I guess I was like super sloppy drunk. I don't remember it, and it's mostly because I had this thought of like, wow, like I'm, turning 23 and Regis died when he was 24 and I feel selfish. Why am I celebrating my life when he's dead? And, this year I just turned 24 and now this year I will be older than him. And I don't want to be older than him. He's always been older than me. So for me, like birthdays are particularly difficult.
I don't know how much you share sort of on social media about sort of the anniversaries and stuff, but for me, sharing that and having, the important dates for him of November 11th, my dad's birthday, and then November 30th as sort of his anniversary, those are two things that I don't sort of post about it for attention. I don't, it's always been sort of a reminder to my friends and family that like, hey, take some time today and call the people that you love and tell them that you love them because, you don't know how much time that you have left with them. And that's always been a weird thing of like, I'll find myself sort of going to share stuff about it. Or like when I visited his grave and I did some writing about it as I was sitting there and sharing it with everybody, it feels like a weird, almost not responsibility taking on, but just of like, I feel the need to share this.
Yeah.
And then sort of judging myself for that. I mean, like,
am I being exploitative?
Yeah, no, exactly. No, right? Exactly.
Am I milking this?
Yeah.
And then you're like, wait.
Yeah.
That's my dad.
Exactly. Right. I am the person who gets to decide how I go about it. So I was wondering if you had like that sort of. I mean, you're doing a podcast sort of about it, so that's its own realm of. Yeah.
Yeah. He's super important to me. There's no me without him, and so. Of course, I want to share these things. Of course, I want to talk about what he went through. And also, I feel a responsibility to him and to the rest of the world to, start a conversation about schizophrenia because there's not one. So it's really tough because it's like, what's too much? What's not enough? There's parts of his story that I won't share publicly and that, are things that I just feel are better kind of left to myself. But I do feel that sharing it is necessary because I wish that I had somewhere like this to turn to when I was going through it. Like I didn't even know what schizophrenia was. And I wish that there would have been some way for me to figure out what was going on with him and like why he was that way. It's really tough to share, and the comments on my last episode, like some of the short form videos I posted, oh my God, it was like, people cannot think this way. They're like, suicide is extremely selfish. How dare he think he could just, kill himself like that? I'm like,
not the point.
I'm like, okay, thank you. Like, what do you want me to do with that?
Yeah.
So it is really hard to share. I can withstand that. And I always think if he could withstand what he went through, I can withstand a couple hate comments from faceless profiles, like user 9731. Like, I'll be good. But yeah, it's a double-edged thing. There's pros and cons.
And I think working sort of in this medium, and I'm not necessarily in podcasting, but I work for radio journalism. I'm a journalist. There are stories that come across my desk and come to me of, hey, this young teacher a town over just died. My editor's like, I want you to go and get a story on it. And I'm like,
Ooh.
Okay, let me make some calls, and just sort of praying that
They don't want to
it goes under
comment.
the table, or
Yeah.
that the family is like, no, I don't want to comment on it, and then sort of seeing where that goes. But on the other hand of that, working in this medium and working as essentially a storyteller, when you are able to make that meaningful connection with a family or a person who is grieving, and getting to turn that into the learning and teaching lesson that I've turned my experience with my father into, so incredibly powerful.
I feel like so many people feel forgotten in their grieving process, or that it's not important anymore, that everyone's moved on, the funeral's over, pack it up, let's get back to life. And then from there, it's just nothing. It's really important to continue on those conversations. Thank you so much
Of course.
for coming on today.
Thank you for having me. This was,
I loved it.
Yeah.
This was so great. I just love talking to people who get it.
Yes. There's nothing quite like, again, getting to sit down with somebody either like in the corner of a party and be like, oh, so I heard that.
So what's the deal with that?
Or getting to do this of like a more meaningful, like drawn out actual conversation about this thing that we're all going to have to deal with eventually. And getting used to talking about it, because I think everybody everywhere is better off having a better sense of comfortableness with death. It is unfortunately a part of life, and getting to find people through that grieving process is, I think, one of the best ways to honor the dead.
I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode of And Also. It definitely was an insightful one, and just a conversation I've been really looking forward to having, and I'm so grateful I got to share it with you guys. So if you did enjoy today's topic and you have topic ideas, guest requests, definitely let me know in the comments or over on Instagram. And of course, as always, all resources are linked in the bio on YouTube or in the show notes on Spotify and Apple. Thank you guys so much for listening to today's episode, and we will see you very, very soon next week.